Hello, lovelies. You're listening to episode 14 of the Broken Enchantments podcast, written and read by Elizabeth Wheatley. That's me. I hope you enjoy this episode, and I'd love to connect with you on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. You can check out the links below. Now let's get to the story. Janir bolted upright just in time to see Lucan force his way through the low doorway of Zirla's house. Behind him followed his Mortons, dragging Carlisle.
Janir, I was worried about you,
Carlisle cried. Lucan cast a poisonous glare in the enchanter's direction. Her brother surveyed everything with a painfully familiar, quick, and decisive glance. Irritation was apparent when he spotted Janir standing between him and Zirla and her daughter. Rushing ahead of me, were you, sister? Please, Lucan, Janir pleaded. Don't claim them. At her supplication, Lucan's eyebrows rose. So, they both have powers, do they? But only one is the seeress, so then the girl is what? An enchantress? Her brother noticed Florite by the fireplace. His look when he caught sight of the girl made Janir's gut clench. What do you want with us, son of Drell? Zirla asked with the authority of a queen. She beckoned, and Florite rushed to stand beside her mother. It was the only sign of unease the seeress showed. I want to know the location of the Temple of Automatons from you, but I may want something else from your young companion. Lucan had not taken his eyes off Florite. The other Argotolums joined him in casting hungry stares toward the girl. Janir knew full well from stories what happened to enchanters or enchantresses who were claimed by Argotolums, and she had no desire to see that happen to this child. Florite met their leers bravely, even though Janir herself was terrified. The girl's courage was admirable, and Janir wished that she could do more to protect them both. That I cannot tell you. There was a note of sadness in Zirla's voice, as if she knew he would not be satisfied with that reply. I think you can, Lucan icily countered. Do you know what will happen if you succeed and deliver the power of automatons to him? Now Janir could see the seeress was afraid. The woman shifted to place herself more firmly between the Argotolums and her daughter, offering the only protection she could. How is that relevant? Tell me where the temple is. I have seen him wreaking mayhem upon all the races. No one can control our race, Lucan snapped. As for the others, we could not care less. He will destroy the Argotolums, Zirla cried. Even before the others are dealt with, his armies will march against you. Even the children of the Carcatan cannot stand for long against such a force. I'll leave that for the Lord Argotolum to decide, Lucan retorted. This world will become a wasteland, and soon even his race will perish. It was in vain that she beseeched Lucan. He was not one to be reasoned with. Letting off an irritated sound, he drew one of Janir's Carcatan from his belt, made a determined grimace as it stung him, and strode toward the seeress and her child. Janir tried to block her brother's path, but he shoved her into a pile of rosemary next to the wall. Before Janir could clamber to her feet, an Argotolum warrior had seized Zirla, and Lucan dragged Florite from her mother. The small girl cried out in terror, and Zirla tried to keep hold of her, but it was useless. Janir rushed to intervene, but at a sharp command from her brother, Kamek snatched her up and took her to stand beside Carlisle. The enchanter looked sadly at Janir, and then pityingly at the young girl. Struggling, Florite reached for her knife. She yanked it free before Lucan saw and slashed him across the arm, just a scratch, but enough to draw blood. The Argotolum hissed in anger and wrested it out of her grip. Little bratchet! Lucan snarled. Zirla cried out in protest as his fist struck the child's cheek. Whimpering, Florite clutched her face. Is the child too much for you? Kamek sneered. Lucan glared at him. My father will ask for an accounting when we return. If this does not change, I shall have to give an unfavorable report of you, Morton. Kamek was unimpressed. As will I of you, Prince. In truth, my report is quite disappointing thus far. He passed Janir to one of the other Mortons with as much care as if she were soiled laundry. Glowering, Lucan ignored the jab and dragged Florite to the middle of the room. He forced her to her knees, now in a more vicious mood than ever. "This girl is very dear to you, is she not?" Lucan snapped to Zirla. The other Argotolums looked on silently for now. Janir had a feeling they would be doing something to assist had it been the Lord Argotolum holding Florite, but they didn't seem to care for helping Lucan. "Please," Zirla whimpered, showing the first hints of desperation. "She's just a child. She has nothing to do with this." "Perhaps not, but you do." Lucan seized the girl's hair, making her whimper in pain. Zirla wrenched against the Argotolum gripping her wrists, but it was no use. "Just let her go." There was already a dead helplessness to her as she morosely shook her head. "I'll do what you want. Just, please." "So you can lie to me as soon as she's run off? Not good enough." Lucan drove one of the carcatan into the back of Florite's neck, right at the base of her skull. She screamed in like a mocking refrain. The carcatan wailed with her, a droning shriek. Zirla cried out and fought against the warrior restraining her, but to no avail. She was forced to watch as her child was tortured. Having made his point, Lucan released Florite from the carcatan's touch. The girl gasped and coughed weakly. Where the carcatan had been, a blistering black mark appeared. "Will you tell me now?" Lucan demanded, stiffly bracing himself against the burn the carcatan inflicted on him. "Just let her go," Zirla repeated, less resolutely this time. "Please, please just let her." With a slight sigh and shake of his head, Lucan drove the carcatan into Florite's back. Janir hated being so helpless, so powerless to stop him. "Tell me," he snapped. "Lucan, please." Janir was cut off as a hard fist cuffed her in the back of the head. Already the light was gone from Florite, and her mother faltered. "If I tell you, she is doomed." There was a tremor in her voice, but not a shred of doubt. The seeress must have foreseen this moment, or some version of it. Shaking, Florite lowered her head. Janir didn't think she could have been so brave under the same circumstances. Again she opened her mouth to reason with her brother, but the Argotolum at her back caught the motion and again silenced her with his fist. "Well then, how about this? You have my word that if you tell me what I want to know, I will let her live. If not..." Lucan savagely ground the carcatan against Florite's flesh. The small girl screamed helplessly and flailed ineffectively against her tormentor. "Tell me!" "No." Zirla had tears streaming down her face. Janir thought she heard something below the demands of Lucan and the screams of Florite, but she couldn't be certain. Lucan pulled the carcatan from Florite's skin, panting in frustration. Determination steeled his features, and he clenched the rod tighter. A low, throaty laugh escaped Kamak. The Morton chuckled unabashedly, shaking his head and folding his arms across his chest. He said nothing, but he didn't have to. Nostrils flaring, Lucan shoved the carcatan into his belt. He jerked Florite around to face him and caught her throat. "If she means so little to you, then I see no reason not to claim her as my own," he jeered, turning to the whimpering Florite. "No, please," Zirla wailed. Florite weakly tried to struggle with Janir's brother. Her futile resistance only served to annoy him. "Then, and this is the last time I will offer you this chance, tell me," Lucan shouted, clenching Florite's throat harder. Zirla hesitated for several seconds before she gave in. Lucan seemed to know that she would, and waited. "According to my visions, the Temple of Amatons is on the tip of the Revelis Peninsula, in the forest." "Thank you." Lucan said it in a way that seemed more of a mockery. "You said you would let her go." Zirla twisted against her captor, but he held her fast. "I am begging you. Please." "No," Lucan growled. "I said I would let her live." Janir's brother turned to Florite. It was difficult to explain, but it was as though Lucan was seeping into Florite's mind through her eyes, or perhaps drawing her out of hers. Vaguely, Zirla screamed in the background. Janir felt a deafening silence, a noiseless void pound over her ears in a single pulse of mute thunder. The seeress screamed again, and Florite slumped limply to the ground. Zirla fought against her Argotalum captor, and this time she broke free. Rushing to the side of her daughter, the seeress sobbed openly.
"This is my fault."
Carlisle was beginning to weep. Although she had just been blaming him for this in her mind, Janir touched his arm in sympathy. Lucan straightened and focused on his hands with a hard interest. He grimaced in concentration until orbs of flowing light appeared in his upraised palms. Florite gasped as her strength was taken. "It never ceases to amaze me," Lucan mused, extinguishing the orbs. This time, Janir was certain she heard something. Faint whooshing. Glancing to her right, there was nothing. Checking her left, with a start, Janir beheld the elf, Malkalar, standing before the low doorway that led to the rest of the house. He seemed to have simply appeared, materialized out of thin air. His dual-wield swords were drawn. Despite having proved he was an enchanter, he showed no fear toward the Argotalums.
"Holy fumets!"
Carlisle gasped. Janir felt much the same way. Several Argotalums drew their carcatan, looking to Kamak for direction. He motioned for them to stand down.
"One of you go outside and make sure the elf is alone," Kamak ordered quietly. "Otherwise, I see no reason not to let the prince deal with this himself."
No, Zirla moaned, cradling Florite and bowing over her as if she could protect her. No, not this, please, not this. She pressed her face against the top of her daughter's head, and the child clung to her in terror.
"Who are you?"
Lucan demanded. If he was surprised or unsettled by the elf's soundless and unseen arrival, he gave no sign. "I will be taking the seeress with me," Malkalar said, sounding remarkably casual for the circumstances. Zirla did not turn away from her daughter. She did not act as if she had heard it all.
"Who are you?"
Lucan repeated in a deliberate tone, separating each word clearly to express that he was by no means impressed. "Someone who demands your compliance, mortal." The elf spat out the name of the race as if it were poison. At a command from Malkalar's lips, a loose piece of clay in the wall sprang up and darted for Lucan. Raising a hand, Lucan stopped the potentially deadly missile midair. It hovered for a moment and retraced its course back toward the enchanter. Malkalar ducked to the side and uttered something that sounded like, "Damn Argotalums."
"An enchanter, are you?"
Lucan asked, despite the obvious answer.
"An Argotalum, are you?"
Malkalar clipped sarcastically. Out of the corner of Janir's vision, the scout returned and whispered in Kamak's ear. He nodded and once again waved for the other Argotalums to stand down. Somewhere between her terror and anguish over Florite, she wondered if Kamak wanted her brother dead. He seemed to act like it. Malkalar caught the brief exchange between the men, and his head cocked to one side slightly as he contemplated the chain of command. Methodically, he surveyed everyone in that room. Janir shuddered as his gaze raked over her. In that moment, Lucan and Malkalar seemed so alike. Both were so cold, so calculative. They might have been two versions of the same man. Wearied with the conversation, Lucan bent his fingers in a practiced pose, and a tongue of flame appeared on his fingertips, grew stronger, then roared toward Malkalar. The Argotalums were remarkably calm, given the circumstances. It was like they were watching a show, not a confrontation. But they had no reason to fear enchanters. They could deflect spells like gnats. In a motion almost too quick to be seen, Malkalar held his swords out before him and traced the top of an invisible shield. As the fire collided with it, the outline shimmered in a luminescent curtain. The flames died as if they had struck water, having no effect on the elven enchanter. Florite moaned weakly as Lucan used so much of her power at once. When Zirla cried out in anguish, Janir knew that her brother had killed the girl. A grimace creased Lucan's mouth as he glanced furtively at the girl's lifeless form, before turning again to the enchanter. Realizing that the victor could not be decided by magic, the elf and Argotalum prince were both still unwilling to fight the other. Lucan must have noticed the assured and confident air about Malkalar that spoke of lifetimes in training and experience. As for the elf, he was doubtless uneager to risk his powers, which appeared to be substantial, in a tussle with this sturdy Argotalum youth and his Mortons. "Where is the key of Amatans?" Malkalar spoke with the air of one who is accustomed to swift and truthful replies.
Go to hell, Lucan snarled.
Janir didn't pay attention to the rest of what Lucan and the elf said, though it was certainly a string of inquiries and insults flying both directions. She stared at Zirla and Floride, wishing she could have done something to change what happened, racking her brain for what she could have done differently. Leaping sideways, the elf sheathed his swords, snatched Zirla's arm, and in less time than it took for a heart to beat, dragged her from the body of her child. With a few hasty words from Malkalar, Zirla's glowing golden orb flew up from the table and rested in his other hand. Lucan clenched Janir's carcatan and made to advance, but he already had what he wanted from Zirla. He didn't order the elf to return her. Janir couldn't help see Zirla's devastation as she watched the body of Floride. The seeress's raw sorrow would doubtless be imprinted on her memory for a lifetime. The girl lay motionless, a perfect, empty, hollowed shell. Not a mark on her, and yet so far beyond saving. When Janir glanced up again, the elf and seeress were gone. Lucan shrugged.
We got what we wanted anyway. He can have the seeress for all I care.
He crammed the carcatan back into his belt.
Come along. We have a temple to find.
He refused to look anywhere near the body of the child he had killed, and couldn't leave that hut fast enough. He marched out the door and disappeared. Janir didn't know what she would do, but pulling against one of the argotolums, she reached for Floride. The girl lay there, just a husk of the very alive child that had been breathing moments before. Floride's death left such a heavy and painful weight in Janir's chest it was hard to breathe. The argotolums grappled with Janir for several seconds and then dragged her after Lucan, away from the lifeless girl and the seeress's cottage. This has been the Broken Enchantments podcast. Thank you for listening. Check out my Patreon for early access to episodes, bonus content, and lots of patrons-only freebies. You can learn more at elizabethwheatley.com. And don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.